He had signed the order himself, with his own hand. Cast out. Permanently. No appeal. No return. He had pressed his seal into the wax while she stood in front of him, and he had not looked up. He had not looked at her face. Because if he had looked at her face, if he had looked into the eyes of the woman he had loved more than his own breath for 2 years, he knew he would not have been able to do it. So he had not looked. He had pressed the seal. He had said the words. And she had left. She had not begged. She had not cried. She had not screamed or fought or thrown the accusations back at him. She had simply said, and this was the thing that would live in his chest like a splinter for the next 4 years, the thing that no amount of duty or distance or deliberate forgetting could pull out. She had simply said, "One day you will understand what you did tonight." And then she was gone. He had told himself she was a traitor. He had told himself the evidence was clear. He had told himself that sentimentality was the enemy of good leadership, and that a man who could not make hard decisions was not fit to rule. He had told himself all of these things every single day for 4 years. He had believed them. Until the morning his border scouts brought in a report from the Eastern settlement. And in the report there was a detail, one small, specific detail that someone had included almost as an afterthought. A description of a woman and 2 children beside her, who had his eyes. Do not forget to like this video. Hit that subscribe button and drop your location where you are watching from in the comments. Because this story, this one, is going to break something open in you. And I need you to be here for every single word. Now let's go back. For years and 6 months ago, before the order, before the seal, before everything, her name was Sanera Voss. The name meant something in the old language, something about the tide. The way water kept coming back to the same shore regardless of what the shore did or didn't do to deserve it. She had always thought this was somewhat on the nose. She was 24 when she first came to the Gracespire Pack's court, the largest and most politically significant pack in the 4 Northern Territories. She came as a translator. For languages, 2 dialects, a working knowledge of the old written scripts that fewer and fewer people could read anymore. She had not come looking for anything beyond work. She had not come looking for the Alpha King. He had not been looking for her either. But the Alpha King, whose name was Caden Moores, which in the old language meant the one who holds the line, had a habit of being present at things that other alphas delegated. Meetings, briefings, administrative sessions. He showed up. He paid attention. He believed that the quality of information he received was directly connected to how much of the collection process he participated in, which meant he was in the room the day Sanera Voss arrived to discuss a translation contract with the court's documentation office. He was not supposed to be in that room. The documentation office was not, technically, his concern. He was there because the chief documentarian had asked him to look at something unrelated, something that happened to require his physical presence in that specific room at that specific time. She came in looking at a contract. She was not looking at him. She sat down across from the documentation office clerk and she read the contract with the full, careful attention of someone who took contracts seriously, which he appreciated even before he understood who she was. And then she looked up, and then she looked at him. Not with the expression he was used to, the adjustment, the recalibration, the sudden awareness of rank and deference that crossed people's faces when they realized who he was. She looked at him like she was assessing whether he was relevant to her current task. Deciding, apparently, that he wasn't, she looked back at the contract. He stood in the corner of the documentation office and thought, who is this woman? He found out that afternoon. He found out the following morning in greater detail. He found out over the following weeks in the way you find out about someone when you have decided, without formally acknowledging the decision, to know them. Sanera Voss had been raised in a border community between the Third and Fourth Territories. Her father had been a traveling scholar, the kind who moved between communities carrying books and knowledge the way merchants carried goods. Her mother had been a wolf of no particular rank who had loved a human man and dealt with the social consequences of this gracefully. Sanera had grown up with one foot in each world and both eyes open. She was not, technically, low rank. She was, technically, not ranked at all in the formal pack hierarchy. Her mixed parentage and her border community upbringing placed her outside the system that most wolves existed within. This suited her. She had her languages and her skills and her sharp, particular mind. She had never needed a rank to tell her who she was. She had told Caden this several months into the thing that was building between them, not at a formal occasion, not in a structured conversation, but in the late evening way of things said between two people who had stopped being careful with each other. "I know exactly who I am," she had said. "I have always known." Most people in this court seem to spend enormous energy figuring out who the room will let them be. I find that exhausting to watch. He had looked at her. "I think you're the most direct person I've ever met," he had said. "I think you're the most indirect person I've ever met," she had said. For someone who supposedly values directness. He had been quiet for a moment. Then, fair. She had smiled. That smile. He had been, he would later understand, completely finished from the moment she looked back at the contract in the documentation office. But the smile was the moment he acknowledged it to himself. She was not beautiful in the obvious way. She was the other kind, the kind that crept up on you. The kind where you noticed something new every time you looked. The kind where the thing you found beautiful was not a single feature, but the whole way she existed in a space. The quality of her attention. The specific architecture of how she moved through the world. He had been Alpha King for 3 years when they met. He had been 27. He had been lonely in the specific, invisible way that powerful people are lonely, surrounded by people, attended constantly, never alone in the practical sense, and yet separated from genuine connection by the glass wall of his position. She did not treat him like he was behind glass. She had never treated him like he was behind glass. That, more than anything, was what he had loved. They were bonded at the end of his 4th year as Alpha King, not with a grand court ceremony. In the garden, at night, with only the stars and his personal aide Mel's as witness. He had not wanted to wait for the formal ceremony. She had agreed. She had said, "I would rather have the real thing tonight than the performance next month." He had said, "This is exactly why I love you." She had said, "I know." They had laughed. He had pressed the gold thread bracelet onto her wrist, and she had pressed the matching one onto his. And his wolf had felt what a wolf felt when it finally, irrevocably arrived at the thing it had been aimed at its entire life. Complete. That was the word. For 5 months, he had been complete. And then, the evidence arrived. The evidence was presented to him by his head of intelligence, a wolf named Durin. Durin had been in the intelligence position for 6 years. He was trusted. He was experienced. He was not a man who presented things carelessly. What he presented was this: communications between Sanera Voss and a contact in the Hadral faction, the most dangerous separatist political organization operating in the Northern Territories. Communications that spanned, apparently, the entire period of her time at court. The communications were coded. Durin had decoded them. They indicated, in Durin's reading, that Sanera had been placed in the Grayspire court deliberately, that her purpose had been to gather intelligence on Caden's governance decisions and military planning, that she had been sending information back to the Hadral faction's leadership for 2 years. Durin had also found, he said, evidence that the bonding itself had been strategic, that she had been instructed to pursue the bond because a bonded alpha was more accessible, more trusting, more likely to share information without thinking about the consequence. Caden had read all of it. He had read it twice. He had felt the bond, warm and present, and so deeply his by that point that the idea of it being manufactured felt like someone trying to tell him the sky was green. He had also felt, somewhere underneath the bond and underneath everything, the cold, specific dread of a man who understood that feelings were not evidence, that love was not proof, that the people who were most dangerous were not the people you mistrusted from the beginning, but the ones you led all the way in. He had asked Durin 3 questions. How certain are you? Who else has seen this? What do you recommend? Durin had said, certain. Only the inner circle. Remove her before it becomes a wider problem. Caden had sat with the evidence for 2 days. 2 days. 48 hours of moving through his court like a ghost, of feeling the bond and looking at the woman he had loved for 18 months and trying to reconcile what the evidence said with what the bond felt. He could not. He could not reconcile it. And he could not find a way to dismiss the evidence either, because it was detailed, because it was specific, because it contained information that could only have come from inside the court. On the second night, he had made his decision. He had told himself, the evidence is what I know. The bond is what I feel. A king cannot govern on feeling. He had not looked at her face. He had pressed the seal. He had said the words. And he had spent 4 years telling himself he had been right. Here is what he did not know. Here is what Durin had not told him. Or more precisely, here is what Durin had told him, carefully, in a way that made true things produce false conclusions. The communications were real. Sanera had communicated with a contact in the Hadral faction, but the communications were not intelligence reports. They were the communications of an informant. Sanera had been, for 2 years before she came to the Greyspire court, an active informant for the Neutral Territory Registry's Intelligence Division, the legitimate oversight body that monitored the Hadral faction's activities and had been building a case against its leadership for 3 years. She had been placed at court not by the Hadral faction, but by the registry. She had been gathering intelligence on the faction's activities and reporting it back through a coded channel that the registry had established. She had been, in other words, working for the side that was trying to stop the Hadral faction, not for the faction itself. She had not told Caden about this work. She had not told him because her handler at the registry had been explicit. No disclosure to court personnel, including leadership, until the operation concluded. The registry had been burned by court leaks before. The directive was clear. She had intended to tell him. She had been waiting for the operation to conclude, which her handler had indicated would happen within months. She had not been fast enough. And Durin, who had been, unbeknownst to Caden, a sympathizer to the Hadral faction's broader political goals for years, Durin had found the communications through his own intelligence network. Durin had decoded them. And Durin had presented them to the Alpha King in a way that was technically accurate and completely misleading. He had not said, she is an informant for the Hadral faction. He had said, she is communicating with the Hadral faction. Both statements were true. Only one of them told the truth. Sanera had known, when Caden called her in and showed her the evidence, what had happened. She had known in the first moment. She had seen Durin standing in the room. She had seen the specific quality of his stillness, the careful, satisfied stillness of someone who had done something they had been planning for a long time. She had understood. She could have told Caden everything, right there. She could have said, "I'm a registry informant. My handler's name is Veth or Dane. You can verify everything I'm telling you with one communication to the registry's head." She had not, because Duran was in the room. Because if she told Caden the truth in front of Duran, Duran would know that the operation was about to be blown. And the 3 senior Hadriel faction members who were 1 month from being arrested, who the registry had spent 3 years building a case against, would be warned and would disappear. She had made a calculation. The same kind of calculation she had been making for 2 years as an informant. She had calculated 3 years of work, 3 imminent arrests, an operation that will prevent years of political violence, versus my own situation. She had chosen the operation. She had chosen to say nothing. She had chosen to be cast out. She had said, "One day you will understand what you did tonight." And she had gone. She had gone. And she had been 3 months pregnant. And she had not known this yet. And even if she had known, she would have made the same calculation. She was certain of this. She had thought about it many times in the 4 years after. She was still certain. The arrests happened 6 weeks after her banishment. 3 senior Hadriel faction leaders, taken in coordinated operations across 2 territories. The case was solid. The convictions, when they came, were permanent. She had heard about it from a distance, in the settlement where she had landed, a quiet place called Orange Reach in the outer edge of the 3rd Territory, far from everything. She had heard about it and felt the specific, complicated feeling of having done something right that had also cost everything. She had also, by then, known about the twins. She had found out at 2 months. She had sat with the information for 3 days. She had thought about going back. She had thought about it seriously, carefully, in the practical way she thought about everything. She had looked at what going back would mean. The banishment order was legal and sealed. Caden believed she was a traitor. Duran was still in his intelligence position, still trusted. Going back meant going back into a court where the one person who knew the truth about her was still operating with the Alpha King's full confidence. Going back meant the children she was carrying would be born into that environment. She had decided, not yet. Not until the situation changed. Not until something shifted. She had told herself, when the time is right, I will find a way. She had not known the time would take 4 years. But she had also not known what 4 years in Orange Reach would give her. It had given her Tass and Emery, her twins, a boy and a girl, born in the deep winter of the year after she left, born with her coloring, her warm brown skin, her dark hair, and his eyes, gray-green, shot through with the particular amber that was specific to the Moore's bloodline and had been in the Grayspire Court's family records for 7 generations. His eyes, looking up at her from the moment they were born. She had held them and felt, simultaneously, the most complete love she had ever felt and the most acute grief, because they deserved to know their father. And their father thought she had betrayed him. The day that changed everything was not a day she had planned. It was an ordinary morning. She was in the market at Orange Reach. Tass and Emery were 3.5, old enough to walk beside her, not old enough to be reliably predictable in a market setting. She had a firm grip on both their hands and was negotiating the purchase of winter vegetables with a farmer she knew. She was not thinking about Grayspire. She was not thinking about Caden. She was thinking about whether the root vegetables were worth the price being asked, and about whether Tass would actually eat something green if she was persistent enough about the presentation. She did not see the border scout until he was very close. He was not in uniform. He was in traveling clothes. But she had spent 2 years as an informant. She could read the specific quality of someone whose job was observation. The way they stood, the way their eyes moved. She kept her face neutral. She paid for the vegetables. She took the children home. And she sat in her small house in Orange Reach, and she thought about what it meant that a Gray Spire Border Scout was in the market at Orange Reach. She thought about the report he would file. She thought about the detail, one small, specific detail, that he might include almost as an afterthought. A woman with 2 children. And she thought about Caden Moore's reading that detail. And she thought about the gray-green eyes. She thought about the calculation she had made every year for 4 years. Not yet. Not until the situation changes. She thought, maybe the situation has changed. She thought, maybe it's about to. She thought about her children and what they deserved. She sat with all of this. Then she went to the small locked box she kept under the floorboard in her bedroom. She took out the documents, the real records of her operation, the communication logs, the handler's verification codes, the registry's sealed confirmation of her status as an authorized informant. All of it, preserved for 4 years, waiting for the moment she needed it. She looked at it. She thought, it's time. Caden received the scout's report on a Tuesday. He read it in the evening, after the day's formal business was concluded, in the private study where he read everything he read alone. He almost missed it. It was a standard Border Patrol report, routine movements, trade activity, nothing of significance. Except for one paragraph near the end. The scout had noted, in the way that experienced scouts noted everything, a woman at the market. The description was brief. Dark hair, brown skin, early 30s, perhaps, and 2 children beside her. A boy and a girl, the scout had written, approximately 3 to 4 years of age. Remarkable, the scout had noted, for the unusual clarity of their eyes. Gray-green, with amber, which the scout had flagged not because it meant anything to him, but because unusual details got noted. That was the job. Caden read this paragraph. He read it again. He read it a 3rd time. And something happened in his chest. Not the bond. The bond had been severed on the records. He had severed it formally, as part of the banishment order. Officially, it was gone. But the bond did not care about official records. The bond had been there every day for 4 years. Ragged, wrong, like a wound that had been cleaned and bandaged but had never quite healed. And now it pulled. Toward the report. Toward the location in the report. Toward the woman with the dark hair and the children with his eyes. He sat very still for a very long time. Then he did something he had not done in 4 years. He felt the thing instead of managing it. He let the full weight of the possibility land on him. For years ago, he had sent away the woman he loved on the basis of evidence he had read in 48 hours. He had not spoken to the registry. He had not spoken to neutral arbiters. He had not gone to Sonera with the evidence and given her the chance to respond to specific points. He had gone to her with a decision already made and asked her to confirm or deny it. And when she had said nothing, when she had looked at Duran in the room and said nothing, he had taken the silence as confirmation. He had not asked himself, why is she silent? He had not asked himself, what would make an innocent person stay silent? He had been 29 years old and betrayed and full of the specific combination of grief and fury that made clear thinking very difficult. And he had sealed the order. He sat with all of this now. Gray-green eyes with amber. His eyes. In a market in Orange Reach. On 2 children who were approximately 3 to 4 years old. He stood up. He called for his aide Mels. He said, "Get me 2 horses. We leave tonight." Mel's, who had been with him for 5 years and had the disposition of someone who had seen a great deal and had developed the wisdom to simply support decisions rather than interrogate them, said, "Yes." And then, "Just us?" "Yes," Cadence said. "Just us." He rode through the night and half the next day. He did not think during the riding. He focused on the road and the rhythm of the horse and refused to think, because thinking at this point produced nothing but spiraling anxiety, and he needed to arrive in a functional state. He thought about two things only: the gray-green eyes and the sentence she had said when she left. "One day you will understand what you did tonight." Not, "I am innocent." Not, "You are wrong." Not even, "I hate you for this." One day you will understand what you did tonight. The specific, measured certainty of someone who knew a truth that the other person would eventually reach. Not through her telling it, through time. He had not been ready to hear it then. He was hearing it now. It had taken 4 years and a scout's report and 2 children with his eyes. But he was hearing it now. Oren's Reach was a small settlement, the kind where newcomers were noticed. He had dressed deliberately in plain traveling clothes. He was not a man who went unrecognized easily. The Moor's bone structure and the gray-green eyes were specific enough that people who knew the court's portraits sometimes did a double take. But he was not in the Fourth Territory often, and Oren's Reach was remote enough that the court's face was not a daily presence. He found the settlement's small market by early afternoon. He walked through it. He was looking for dark hair and 2 small children. He found her at the edge of the market, buying something from a stall selling dried herbs. She had not seen him yet. He stopped. He stood 15 feet away and looked at her for the first time in 4 years. For years. She looked, not older exactly, more settled, like someone who had been through something hard and had built something from it. She moved differently than she had in the court. Not worse, not better. Differently. Less watchful. More present. She was holding a child's hand. 2 children, beside her. He could only see the back of them from where he stood. Dark hair, both of them. Small. 4 years old, approximately. Then the girl turned around to look at something behind her. And Cadence saw her face. He felt the ground shift under his feet. Not metaphorically. Something happened in his legs that required him to put his hand on the nearest market stall for a moment. The girl's eyes. Gray-green, with the amber shot through them. His grandmother's eyes. His eyes. His father's eyes before that. And his father's father before that. 7 generations of Moore's eyes looking up at him from the face of a child who had no idea he existed. The boy turned then too. The same eyes. 2 of them. His. Sonera was still looking at the herbs. She had not looked up yet. Caden breathed. He let go of the market stall. He walked forward. She felt him before she saw him. Of course she did. The bond was still there. It had always been there. She had managed it the way she managed everything, with the practical, daily discipline of someone who knew that living required function, and function required not lying in the wreckage of things that couldn't be changed. But the bond was there, and when it pulled, suddenly, specifically, with the directional certainty of something that had been waiting 4 years for exactly this, she knew. She looked up. He was 8 feet away. He had stopped. He was looking at the children. She watched his face. She had been thinking about this moment for 4 years. She had rehearsed it in her head more times than she could count. She had prepared arguments and explanations and the specific order in which she would present the evidence she had preserved. She had been calm in all the rehearsals. She was not calm now, but she kept her face still. She held Tass's hand a little tighter. "Emery," who had already spotted the tall stranger and was regarding him with the fearless assessment of a 4-year-old who had not yet learned that strangers could be complicated, said, "Who are you?" Caden looked at his daughter. He looked at her for a long moment. His voice, when it came, was not the Alpha King's voice. It was something underneath that, something that had not been near the surface in 4 years. "Someone who should have been here a long time ago," he said. Emery considered this. "You weren't here before," she said, with the absolute factual certainty of childhood. "No," he said. "I wasn't." "Why?" He looked up at Sonera, his gray-green eyes, full of things she recognized even across 4 years. Full of things she had been carrying the answer to the whole time. "Because I made a mistake," he said, still looking at Sonera, a very large one. They sent Mel's with the children to the small baker's stall where Emery had been eyeing something since they arrived. It was a brief, practical arrangement. Mel's was good with children in the specific way of people who had a lot of younger siblings, and Tass and Emery accepted the suggestion of something sweet with the philosophical flexibility of 4-year-olds. Sonera and Caden stood in the market while the crowd moved around them and the world continued its ordinary business. She spoke first. She had always been more direct than him. "Sit down," she said. "There's a bench by the well." They walked to it. They sat. Not close. A gap between them. She reached into the bag she always carried, and she took out an envelope. She had carried it for 4 years. She placed it on the bench between them. "Read that first," she said. He looked at the envelope. He looked at her. He picked it up. She watched him read. She watched him read it the way she had watched him read things at court, with his full attention, with the complete stillness of someone who was processing at depth. Nothing visible on the surface. He read it twice. She counted. When he looked up, his face was, she had expected anger. She had expected the specific fury of a man who had been deceived by the person he trusted most. She had not expected what she saw. She had not expected the expression of a man who had been right about everything he feared and wrong about all the specifics, and who was sitting with both of those things at the same time. "Registry informant," he said. "Yes," she said. "For 2 years before you came to court." "Yes." "The communications Duran found were my reports back to my handler," she said. "Not intelligence being sent to the faction. Intelligence being sent about the faction." He was quiet. "Duran," he said, "was a Hadral sympathizer," she said. "Had been for years. He found my communications through his own network. He decoded them accurately and presented them to you in a way that was technically truthful and completely false." Caden said nothing. She let the silence be. "In the room," he said eventually, "when I showed you the evidence, you didn't say anything." "Duran was there," she said. He looked at her. "If I had told you the truth in front of Duran, he would have known the operation was compromised. The 3 senior faction members we had been building toward for 3 years would have been warned. They would have disappeared." She met his eyes. "I made a calculation. You chose the operation over your own situation," he said. "Yes," she said. "Over me," he said. "Yes," she said. And then, because she was Sonera Voss and she had always been direct even when it was the hardest option, "I don't know if that was right. I have thought about it every day for 4 years. The arrests happened. The case was solid. The right thing happened." She paused. "And I lost 4 years. And my children grew up without their father. And you spent 4 years believing I had betrayed you." She looked at her hands. "I don't know how to balance those things," she said. "I'm not sure they can be balanced. I just know that at the moment I made the decision, it was the best calculation I had." He was looking at her. "You said," he said quietly. One day you will understand what you did tonight. Yes, she said. You meant. I meant that you had made a decision without giving me the chance to speak to the evidence, she said. That you had trusted Duran's presentation over your own, over what you knew of me, what you had spent 18 months learning about me. She looked at him. I wasn't angry at you for believing the evidence. She stopped, found the honest word. I was devastated that you hadn't asked me. He breathed. I should have asked you, he said. Yes, she said. I should have asked you before I made any decision. Yes, I should have, he stopped. He pressed his hand flat against his own leg. I should have been in that room with the evidence and looked at you and said, tell me what this is. Yes, she said. And I didn't, he said, because I was afraid of what you would say. This stopped her. What, she said. He looked at her with the gray-green eyes that their children had inherited. I was afraid, he said, that if I looked at you and gave you the chance to say it was true, to confirm it, I would fall apart. And I could not afford to fall apart. I was the alpha king, and my bonded mate had, apparently, been a plant from my enemies. And if I sat in front of her and heard it from her own mouth. He stopped. So I didn't give you the chance to speak, he said. I made the decision in advance, and I executed it without looking at you, and I told myself it was because the evidence was clear. He paused. But the truth was that I could not bear to hear you say it. And the possibility that you might say something else, that there might be another explanation, was more terrifying than the certainty of the worst thing, because at least the worst thing I could manage. She sat with this. It was not the explanation she had expected. It was worse and better than the one she had expected. Worse because the thing that had destroyed 4 years of both their lives was not coldness or calculation or the detached decision of a king over a person. It was fear. Specific, human, devastating fear. The fear of a man who loved something so much that the idea of having to hear the love confirm its own betrayal was more than he could hold. Better because it was human. It was not cruelty. It was not indifference. It was a person who had been in enormous pain and had done the wrong thing with it. She understood this. She understood it because she had her own version, the calculation she had made in that room, the operation she had chosen over speaking, the 4 years she had maintained instead of finding another way. They had both made decisions in moments of impossible pressure. They had both made the wrong ones. Differently, at different times. And they had both paid for it. She said, Tass asked me last month why he didn't have a father. He closed his eyes briefly. What did you tell him? He asked. I told him that his father was someone who didn't know he existed yet, she said. And that when he did know, he would come. He opened his eyes. You told him I would come, he said. I told him the truth, she said. I believed it. He looked at her. Even after 4 years, he said. Even after 4 years, she said. He looked at the well. He looked at the market around them. He looked at the baker's stall where 2 small people with his eyes were eating something sweet. Sonera, he said. She waited. I have been wrong, he said. In the specific, particular way that is most damaging. Not through malice, but through the failure of courage at the exact moment courage was most required. He turned to face her fully. I should have looked at you. I should have asked. I should have trusted what I knew of you above what Duran was telling me. He paused. I cannot give back 4 years. I cannot undo what was done. I know that. Yes, she said. But I want to try, he said. Whatever trying looks like from here. However long it takes. Whatever it requires of me. He held her gaze. I want to start with the truth. And the truth is that I have been wrong. Completely wrong. And that I am sorry. Not in the way of someone trying to fix something quickly, but in the way of someone who understands the full weight of what they did and intends to spend whatever time it takes making it mean something. She looked at him. She felt the bond. She let herself feel it fully for the first time in 4 years. It was not ragged anymore. Or it was ragged. Yes, 4 years of severed connection had done damage that would not heal overnight. But underneath the damage, it was still there, full and real and specifically his. The tide, she thought. Her name meant the tide. Water that kept coming back to the same shore regardless of what the shore did or didn't do to deserve it. She had always thought this was somewhat on the nose. She was beginning to think her parents had known something. Emery arrived back with Tass and Mel's. Her face was sticky with something. She looked at the two adults on the bench and then at her mother with the specific assessment of a 4-year-old. "Are you sad?" she asked Sanara. "No," Sanara said. "I'm." She looked for the right word. "I'm figuring something out." Emery appeared to accept this. Then she turned to Caden. She put her hands on her hips in the way she had developed recently that Sanara found hilarious and occasionally exhausting. "Are you going to stay?" Emery asked him. The question hit the air and sat there. Caden looked at his daughter, then at Sanara, then back at Emery. "If your mother will let me," he said. Emery turned to Sanara. "Can he?" she asked. Sanara looked at Caden. She thought about 4 years. She thought about the calculation she had made in the room with Duran standing there. She thought about her name and what it meant and the tide that came back regardless. She thought about what trying looked like from here. She thought about Tass, who had asked about his father. She thought about Emery, who always asked exactly the right question at exactly the right time. She thought about the bond. Still there. Ragged, yes. But there. "Yes," she said. What followed was not immediate. Nothing real was immediate. The road back was long and required more than a single conversation on a bench by a well. It required Duran being investigated, which happened within the week of Caden's return to Grayspire. The investigation, given the evidence Sanara had preserved and the registry's full cooperation, was swift and damning. Duran was removed. He was charged with falsifying intelligence, with operating as a covert sympathizer inside the court's most sensitive security position, and with the deliberate construction of a false case against an authorized registry informant. The charges were serious. The consequences were permanent. The registry, for their part, took responsibility for their own role, specifically the directive of non-disclosure that had left Sanara without the ability to speak in her own defense. The directive was reviewed. The policy was changed. These changes were implemented with the specific efficiency of institutions that had been embarrassed and wished to demonstrate that embarrassment was productive. The banishment order was formally voided. The registry provided public documentation of Sanara's service and its nature. The record was corrected. She came back to Grayspire in the late spring. Not to the court immediately. To a house at the edge of the territory, one Caden had arranged, with the careful respect of someone who understood that she had been managing her own life for 4 years and was not going to simply move back into his as if the 4 years were erasable. She was not erasable. Nothing about those 4 years was erasable, and she did not want it erased. Those 4 years had made her. They had made Tass and Emery. They had built the specific strength and practicality and settledness that she now carried. She did not want to trade them for simplicity. She wanted to build forward from them. This was what she told Caden when he asked how she wanted to approach what came next. She said, "I want to build forward. Not pretend the gap didn't exist. Use it." He had said, "Tell me what that means." She had said, "It means we learn each other again. Not pick up where we left off. That place is gone. We build from where we actually are. He had said, that sounds harder. She had said, most things worth having are. He had smiled. She had felt the bond, warm and specific and still his, still her, still real. And she had thought, yes, this, from here. The children were the fastest part. Children were often the fastest part. Tass and Emery had known a world with only their mother in it. And then a man had appeared, and their mother had said he was important, and they had done the thing 4-year-olds did, which was to simply incorporate the new information and continue. Tass had decided, on approximately the 3rd day, that Caden was useful for lifting things to heights that Senera could not easily reach. Emery had decided, more thoughtfully and after more observation, that he passed her assessment criteria, which appeared to involve watching how he treated her mother, which was the exact right criteria, and which Senera found both touching and slightly alarming for a 4-year-old. By the end of the 1st month, Tass had taken to calling him by name. Caden, directly, with the unself-consciousness of childhood. Emery called him something that sounded like it was working toward a title, but hadn't fully landed on one yet. On the morning of the 6th week, she settled on it. She announced it at breakfast. I'm going to call you Da, she said, with the tone of someone making a decision they intended to be final. Caden went very still. Senera held her breath. Emery looked at him with the gray-green eyes. Is that okay? She asked. Because she also asked for confirmation occasionally. He looked at Emery. He looked at Tass, who was watching with the focused attention of someone awaiting a verdict. He said, yes, that's yes. He said it in a voice that was not the Alpha King's voice. It was something much older and much more essential than that. Senera looked at her eggs. She was not, as a general rule, a person who cried easily. She did not look up until she was sure she was fine. When she looked up, Caden was looking at her. His eyes were, she would not say wet, but they were doing something. She reached across the table. She put her hand on his. He turned it over and held on. The children went back to breakfast. Outside, the late spring morning was doing the ordinary, extraordinary thing that mornings did, continuing, warm, full of small sounds and ordinary light. And in a kitchen in a house at the edge of Grayspire territory, something that had been broken for 4 years was, quietly, in the most undramatic and essential way possible, beginning to be whole. This is the thing she had learned. Not easily, not quickly, in the long, daily, unglamorous way that the most important lessons were always learned. She had learned that being right was not the same as being safe. She had been right to protect the operation. She had been right about the calculation. And it had cost 4 years and the chance to give her children their father from the beginning. Being right did not protect you from the cost of the method. What she had also learned was this. She had carried the truth for 4 years. Every day, in the locked box under the floorboard, in the space of the bond that she had not allowed herself to fully feel, in the patient, determined certainty that the truth had weighed, and that weight would eventually land where it needed to. She had been right about that too. The truth had landed. It had taken a scout's report and 2 children with gray-green eyes, but it had landed. And this was the thing she held on to when she thought about the 4 years. The truth does not expire. You can delay it. You can complicate it. You can make it harder to arrive by putting things in its way. But the truth, carried carefully, will eventually reach the place it was always headed. Even if the route is 4 years through the dark. Even if the route costs things that cannot be returned. Even if the destination looks different than you imagined when you started. She had started with Caden in a garden at night with gold thread on her wrist and everything ahead of them. She had arrived at a kitchen table with two 4-year-olds and a man holding her hand who was learning, slowly and genuinely, how to look at the thing he was afraid of instead of sealing the order. It was not the same destination. It was a better one, because they had both earned it. He had believed she betrayed him. He had pressed the seal. He had looked away. And 4 years later, two children with his eyes had looked back at him, not as punishment, as a rival, as the specific, patient, unstoppable thing that truth did when you carried it carefully and kept walking. He had made a mistake, not a small one, the kind that left marks, the kind that changed the shape of a life. And then he had met his daughter's eyes in a market in Oran's Reach. And he had done the thing he should have done 4 years ago. He had looked and kept looking and not sealed the order. He had asked, and the answer had been there all along, waiting, the tide, coming back to the shore, the same shore, regardless. If this story sat with you, if you felt the weight of that sealed order, if you held your breath when Emery turned around in that market and he saw his own eyes looking back at him, if you felt something break open when she said, "I told him his father would come, and I believed it," then this channel is yours. We don't do light stories here. We do the ones that cost something. The ones about people who make terrible decisions with their love and then have to live in the consequence of them and choose, every day, forward from that consequence, whether to keep going. The ones where children inherit their parents' unfinished stories and carry them forward in their small hands and their borrowed eyes. The ones where the tide comes back. Always. Subscribe right now, because you have been watching this story and feeling it in a specific, real part of yourself. And the reason you feel it is because you know that the hardest things are the truest things. And the truest things deserve to be told. We tell them every week. New stories, new wolves, new people looking away and then learning how to look back. Like this video, so it reaches the person who needs it today. Drop your location in the comments and tell us the moment, the specific moment that got you. Was it the signed order? Was it the gray-green eyes in the market? Was it Emery asking, "Can he stay?" Was it duh? Tell us. Because those moments, those are the reason we're here. We read every single one, and we will see you in the next story.